The first step towards mastering pivot tables is understanding exactly how the field list works. Think of the field list as your cockpit or your command center, where you can drag and drop your fields to customize exactly how the data in your pivot table will be displayed. Now there are 5 key sections of the field list to pay attention to. The first section on top lays out all of the columns available in your source data, with check marks for any fields that are currently included somewhere in the pivot. In this case, we're looking at a simple dataset containing only 4 fields: state, year, total population, and student population. Beneath that, you have 4 boxes: filters, columns, rows, and values, and these 4 boxes determine what data you're looking at and how it's filtered and organized in your pivot table. So I actually like to start in the lower right box and drag in any quantitative or numerical fields that I care about analyzing. In other words, these are the metrics that I can count, things like sales, revenue, population, clicks, etc. In the example shown here, we only care about total population. Now the next step is determining how we want to summarize those values. Do we want to see total population by state, by year, by something else? Depending on how you choose to summarize your values, in this case by state, you can drag that field to either the rows or the columns boxes. If I drag state into the rows box in the lower left, I'll end up with a pivot 50 rows tall with a row for each state along with the total population for each. If I drag state into the columns box in the upper right, I'll end up with a pivot 50 columns wide with a column for each state instead of a row. And then finally we have the filters box in the top left, where we can store any field that we might like to use to filter the entire pivot table view. By dragging in year, like we see here, we're now able to view state populations for any specific year or any specific subselection of years by manipulating that filter. So let's jump into Excel and actually practice this. Alright, so here we are in Excel. We're in the new sheet that we created to insert a pivot based on our IMDb movie database tab. And over here on the right, we've got our field list with a nice blank canvas to work with. So first and foremost, let's double click that tab name and just name it pivot to be a bit more clear. And let's practice manipulating the fields in the field list to create different sorts of views within this pivot. So first and foremost, I'm going to scroll through and just see exactly what measures and dimensions I have to work with here. So I've got a number of different categorical fields like title, release date, genre, and I've got measures or numerical fields like reviews, revenues, budgets, etc. So to kick things off, I'm interested in seeing gross revenue for this data set. So I'm going to pull that in to the values box, and as you can see, it shows me just the total sum of all of the gross revenue in the entire data set. And I can actually drag that field in a few different ways, and vice versa. I can drag it out by just releasing it back into the field list. Now instead of clicking and dragging, I could have also just checked the box next to the variable name, and if Excel identifies that field as numerical, it will automatically populate the values box for me. So now obviously just seeing the total revenue for the entire data set isn't particularly helpful or useful in any way. What I really care about doing is breaking that revenue down and summarizing it at different levels and by different categorical fields. So to start, why don't we break down revenue by movie title? So I can click title and drop it right here in the rows box. What that gives me is one row for each title in the entire data set, along with the associated gross revenue total. Now I could have dragged title over here into the columns box, which gives me the correct numbers, but as you can see, it's really just not very readable or intuitive in that format. So I'm going to drag it back and keep it in the rows field for now. So this is nice. I've got gross revenue broken down by title. Next thing I can do is add a filter if I choose. So what if we only want to look at films for a particular country? I can click country and drag it right here into the filters box. And as you can see, Excel has added a new filter right above my view with the option to view data for a particular country or subset of countries. So I can click the box and say, okay, update my view to only show me films produced in Canada. And as you can see, the whole view updates accordingly. Or I can say only show me films in Australia, and there you go. And I don't have to be limited to just a single filter. I can also pull in language as well. So now I can filter by country, by language. I can pull in color or black and white. In this case, let's only look at color films in Australia. And you can see that our view updated. And the same goes for our row or column labels. Right now we're only breaking down the data by title, but we can drill deeper into this. So let's say we want to see gross revenue by both genre and title. See how it just nested these two fields together? So now I'm looking at the gross revenue by title and by genre. So within the action category for films produced in Australia that are in color, we find these particular titles, which drove this much revenue, and the genre as a whole drove this much revenue. So as you can see, we're getting more and more deeper insight into this data set that we never would have been able to easily see otherwise, just by clicking and dragging and dropping some fields using the field list. So now let's drag title out so that we're only looking at the revenue by genre. Just like we were able to add multiple filters and multiple row labels, we can also look at multiple value fields. So why don't we take budget and drag budget in as well. So now we're looking at revenue and budget by genre. Let's go ahead and clear these two filters so that we're no longer limited to just Australian color films. Now we're looking at all countries, all languages, all color or black and white films. So one thing you may have noticed when we added the second value field in here is that a new label popped up here in the columns box that says values. And basically, you can click and drag and move this values field around just like any other field. And what this does, it allows you to determine exactly how to organize the values in your pivot. So right now, the values are organized as columns. As you can see here, we've got a column for revenue and a column for budget. If we drag this into the rows field after genre, you can see that now our values are organized or stacked one above the other in terms of rows. And as you move this, you can get a sense of what it's actually doing. So in this case, the values category comes first, all of the gross revenue figures first by genre, followed by all of the budget figures by genre beneath that. And then we can drag it back to columns, which is the default view. And that just gives you some flexibility if you want to adjust exactly how your values are organized in your pivot table view. So more on this to come later, but here's a quick primer on how to create and manipulate views using the pivot table field list.